Hello everyone and welcome back to the Game Gear-a-thon with Tails Adventure! The game is called Tails Adventure in basically every box art aside from Japan. In fact, the game is even only called Tails Adventures in Japan, they just didn't change the title screen over. And like Tails Sky Patrol, it's a bit different. Whereas Sky Patrol is a bit of a Gradius kind of thing, this is a bit of a Metroid, Shantae Pirates Curse, Castlevania Order of Ecclesia sort of thing, where you're exploring around and trying to find items. Control-wise, it's similar to the way Tails controls in the main Sonic games. D-pad does the usual, up and jump makes you fly, though you have a pretty low flight there to begin with. And your main attack is bombs. You can angle them in slightly certain ways. By holding up, you can just throw them slightly higher, and by holding down, you can throw them a bit lower. And to combine them in order to take out enemies. Blocks like that can be destroyed with your bombs. This introductory level is basically just there to teach you all the ways you can throw bombs, your normal way at least. Rings there are your health, as with usual, but it's not you only get 2 hits. You see, the 10 rings up there on the top is actually the amount of health I have. I have 10 health. And enemies at this point can do anywhere from 1 to 2, and I think the boss can do up to 3. There are ways to upgrade your flight and your health, but as for that, we'll see it when we cross that bridge. Now, this game's story changes depending on whether or not you're reading the Japanese or the American manual. So let's read the American. Welcome to Tails Island, Tails' favorite holiday spot. Sonic and Tails have temporarily parted for a little vacation time. Even heroes need some time off now and then, and at this moment, Tails is enjoying a rest in the woods. But that peace won't last long. There's a great noise and the woods are suddenly ablaze. Tails sees a flying fortress lowering on the horizon, launching attacks against the island. Who could be landing such an attack on this harmless place? There's no time for guessing. As Tails, you must fight the bird forces to stop the battle fortress from taking complete control of the island. On land, in the air, and at sea, you'll be battling some pretty tough birds. Several useful items are scattered throughout the island, which you'll need in your ventures. The animals of the island are counting on you. The reason that these birds are invading the island is because somehow the Chaos Emeralds are here, even though they seem to change location every 7 days, so I don't know what's going on with that. And I'll go over the Japanese manual soon. But the main difference, really, in terms of the manuals, is that when it takes place has changed. In Japan, this is viewed as a prequel, similarly to Tails Sky Patrol. But this, in America, it's viewed as just him and Sonic taking a little break from each other. So that's a bit odd, but yeah. The name of the island also changes. It's known as Tails Island in America, but it's known as Cocoa Island in Japan, like Cocoa, the chocolate kind of thing. And it's apparently not on any maps. Either way, you see that thing there? We saw one a bit earlier. These are items, and this is the red Chaos Emerald. Chaos Emeralds are pretty much your health upgrades. For getting it, your flight meter gets increased. I think in this case it gets doubled from like 2 seconds to 4. And your health gets upped by 10. Yet again, though, like every Sonic Game Gear game that's had Chaos Emeralds to collect, there's only 6. Either way, we're coming up on the first boss, who is pathetically easy. First boss of Tails Adventure is the Birdwalker. This thing likes to either blow out a giant fire wave, a small fire wave, or try to jump on you. Aside from that, he only really has touch damage. 10 bombs to any part of his body will take him out. He is very easy, but he could still do a decent chunk of damage, I believe. I want to say 2. Yeah, 2, so that you only have 5 hits if you don't get that Chaos Emerald. So watch out for that. Overall, though, since he's the first boss, he is still pretty pathetic. And with that, we've cleared the first area. However, well, first off, for beating him, we actually got our first new item, the Remote Bot. I'll go over what that does in a moment. Similarly to Metroid, you will be backtracking to areas because there's certain items we couldn't get in the Poloy Forest yet. And there's certain ones we won't be able to get in the Volcanic Tunnel either, but we need to come here in order to progress onwards. Now, in terms of restoring your health, if you get damaged, there's only 2 ways. One is rings, which I mentioned earlier, which can either be dropped by enemies or found in certain sections of the wall you can destroy, and you can tell them apart pretty easily because they're usually the destructible blocks. Or by heading back to Tails' house. Tails' house, I'll show it off a bit later because you kind of have to go there, but that's basically where you switch your items, restore your health, and even get your password. And you're going to want to write down that password because this game doesn't have any kind of save file. And if you don't write down the password and have it memorized or anything like that, you're back to the title screen if you die, you have to start all over, and that sucks. Either way, over here is our next item, the Hammer, which is a very short-ranged melee attack. That's all it does. Though it's an odd precursor to Amy's Pico Pico hammer, which wouldn't show up until 3 years later, actually, in Sonic Adventure. Overall, in this game in particular, I am of the mindset that you should stick with longer range weapons like bombs and such, because then you can just have a better chance against enemies. Because the thing is about enemies in this game is that they can actually have some pretty annoying attacks to dodge, so staying in a distance is a bit better. And as you see there are environmental damage tiles like spikes and lava. They do about 3 to 4 damage each, so watch out for that. Admittedly, the farther you get in the game, you don't really have to worry about things like this as much because your health can get pretty high. But for this point, it's still a bit low, so you want to be a bit cautious. Now, the thing is about a lot of the areas, at least in early game, is that in terms of when... Because obviously, you can leave these areas anytime you want. The only time you really should leave, though, is when you do one of two things. Either fight a boss or get a Chaos Emerald, because that basically means you're probably done there for now. So if you ever do that, that's basically a good idea, just to go and see if you can explore any previous areas a bit more. And I know there's probably items I'm missing that I possibly could get at this point, but the thing is, I have a set route that I like to follow, so I'm going to do that. Plus, it just makes things more convenient for me in terms of playing through stages without having to go through either dangerous areas or having to backtrack a bit more than usual. And here's the first use of the remote bot. Remote bot works is the way you... Well, first off, the way you switch items is by pressing start, then pressing left to right. And the remote bot is just that, a remote-controlled robot. And it controls basically the same as Tails, only he can't enter flight in midair. He can't get touched by enemies, otherwise he will be... Oh, not die, but he'll be sent back to Tails, and you can send him back to Tails manually by pressing, I want to say, 1. Yeah, because 2 is the jump button. It's pretty much just an extension of Tails, but you know, I like that. Almost all the abilities in this game are just an extension of Tails. Either way, for doing that, we got the remote bomb, which is fairly similar to the remote bombs from the Zelda games. The way it works is that, well, first off, if you throw it and it touches the ground, its momentum will carry it forward. It will slide along the floor until it hits something. And it doesn't explode automatically, as you can see. You have to press the button yourself in order for it to detonate, meaning... If you know how to place bombs, it's probably really good, but I prefer remote bombs because they explode a bit more quickly, and their arc is a lot more natural to me. That's another thing remote bombs actually don't have. Their arc is noticeably less extreme, so you have to be a bit careful about that. Also, these flamethrowers kind of suck with timing because I think it's almost impossible to avoid some of them. Honestly, though, Volcanic Tunnel, at least early game portions of it, are pretty simple because the only things that can do major damage to you are the spikes and the lava. And if you know how to control the flight really well, and by the way, the flight controls excellently in this game, especially if you go from a standstill, avoiding it shouldn't be that much of an issue. Although I actually really like the background. And admittedly, I love the way it looks, too, because this was released after Triple Trouble, I believe. And like I said, Triple Trouble already pushed the Game Gear to good limits, and so does this. And technically speaking, so does the game after next that I'm playing for this Game Gear-a-thon, but yeah, that's in a different way, and it's not that good. Ugh, I'm not looking forward to that. So, Tails does suffer a bit of knockback, especially when you get hit from midair, but honestly, it's nowhere near as bad as any given Castlevania game, so it should be fine. The most annoying thing that can happen is that you'll fall down a pit you're flying up or something. Nothing too bad. Admittedly, something I'm not too fond of Tails Sky Patrol is that some of the music is a bit too short and repetitive. Not so much with, like, say, the World Map theme or the Poloy Forest theme, but Volcanic Tunnel's music in particular just kind of bores me. But that's me. I'm sure there's someone out there that loves it. There are fireballs that come out of the lava, which are probably the most annoying thing about this area, and I think they do about 3 damage, so that's actually pretty lethal. But they do come out in pretty predictable places, either in an open pool of fire or from cracks in the ground. And here's a green Chaos Emerald, that's 2 already. And now our flight meter is extended to around 6 to 7 seconds, and we have 30 health. This is why you need the normal bombs over the remote bombs more often than not, because if you had the remote bombs, you wouldn't be able to hit those blocks. Basically, though, the thing is, with getting the remote bombs, I actually have the max inventory limits. Because the thing is, you can only hold up to 4 items, which I have right now. Normal bombs, Remobot, hammer, remote bomb. And for the most part, you want to keep the normal bombs, Remobot, and remote bombs around because they're pretty good for accessing areas. So more or less, your inventory in this game, which you can alter at Tails' house, by the way, because that's where you can find out all the things. That's where you can find all the things you've found. In fact, you can even find the things of the names of things you haven't found yet in there. So you can get a hint of what you're looking for, probably in certain instances. Your inventory is basically going to have 3 set things more often than not, and 1 cycling slot. Which, you know, a lot of games do that. In fact, that's the way a lot of players should play certain games, so I'm not too... I like that idea. Because it's basically what happens with some JRPG parties. You have that one member that's always cycling. Either way, for clearing Volcanic Tunnel, at least through that exit, we found Poly Mountain 1. Which is, I think, the part in the game where the difficulty spikes ever so slightly. Not much, but noticeably enough. Because there are next boss fights at the end of this area, and there's a lot of spikes around here. Thankfully, you should have a good amount of Chaos Emeralds at this point. By that I mean 2, so your flight meter should have a good amount for you to abuse. If you see that item behind there, we actually cannot get that yet. We cannot break those blocks. Our bomb is not powerful enough, and we don't have the means to get through it. Oh boy. I love this song, by the way, though. It's so happy sounding. I hate these particular bird enemies here, though, because I guess they're tears or whatever they're throwing. Comes out in shots of 2 and then a third one, I believe, and it's pretty annoying to dodge if you're not paying attention, especially when they place most of them. And right there we got the helmet, which is the next item, and here I'm showing off the fact you can only have 4 items at a time. The helmet is something I don't like too much. I forget if I even have to use it at any point in time, because I haven't recorded the entire game yet, but I forget if you ever need to use the helmet. Basically, the helmet, when you have it equipped and you hold the 1 button, you basically go into a Met Tool mode. You're invincible underneath the helmet, however you cannot move. Not particularly useful. Now, the thing is about this area is that if you're doing what I'm doing, you're technically doing 2 trips, because we want to head to the upper path, because I skipped over a lower path earlier. And then you're going to want to exit, and then come back in to go to the lower path, so you can actually finish what the area intends you to do at this point. But we'll see that when we come to it. Admittedly, the game does have some slight layering issues, like there are times where the background will go over the ring and the rating box and the item slot. And some enemies can even pop in front of it, but overall, admittedly, the HUD is actually fairly well laid out. And here's the upper route I wanted to go to. Okay, more enemies. You want to head down here, because there is an item we can get at this point over here that I think you're technically not supposed to know how to get until later. It's just the fact that if you're exploring, you'll probably find it. Mind you, I guess the case of this is to just explore, so, Speaking of exploration, by the way, another Metroid 2 remake finally came out, and I've been following that since middle school, so it's been about 6 years. Oh god, thank you, Wind. I'll probably do a video on another Metroid 2 remake at some point, because I finished it and it was really good. Also, I hate these 3 bird enemies here, but there is the item, and it is a bit of a unique one. We found Knuckles! What? We actually didn't find Knuckles itself. It's another melee attack. You press 1 and you do pretty much a punch. And you're gonna, I believe you need that in order to get through a certain obstacle later on, so make sure to grab that. And now I want to fall down this hole because it'll actually take me back out to the map screen, allowing me to backtrack to this area much more quickly. So now we can actually go down this lower path I skipped over earlier, heading towards where the boss is. Oh, that's cheap. I hate the placement of that bird. If you move forward, you're almost guaranteed to get hit. And that's no good. Admittedly, it becomes kind of apparent in certain later areas of the game that they place a lot of enemies in your way just because you have a lot of health and can take their damage. Which, I'm not sure how I feel about that game design choice, because just because a player has a lot of health doesn't mean you should place a lot in their way just to get rid of it. Because that seems like cheap difficulty. Either way, over here we get the Super Glove, which is comparable to the Power Glove from certain Zelda games. With it, we can now pick up certain rocks we couldn't before by pressing the 1 button in front of them, as long as we have it equipped. I believe we actually saw one of those items earlier on in Poloy Forest, so yeah, now you can do that. And I hate this platforming section because seriously, you don't need this many enemies on small platforms. I will say overall that the game's difficulty is fairly on the easy side, but there are points where you're just like, they don't need this many enemies in this small of an area and such. But, to each their own, I suppose. Some people would probably find that to be an interesting way to add challenge. I'm trying to remember, did Shovel Knight do that? Because that seems like a game that would do that. I can't remember. If they did, it was probably in either Polar Knight stage or Propeller Knight. Or the final stage, because seriously, that final stage was one hell of a difficulty spike. Decafutty. Yeah, that's a word, Kyle. Don't you hate it when your brain does that? Because my brain does that a lot. Admittedly, I always did like the enemies designs in this game because they're all pretty cute. But at the same time, they almost all, there we go, I finally got that sentence to work. They almost all remind me of the penguin boss from Triple Trouble because of similar shaders used on the head and such. Well, not shaders, but you know what I mean. Similar shading on the sprites. There we go. Either way, to the right is actually our next boss fight. If you can call it that. It is against this guy who is Battle Cuckoo the 16th, also known as Speedy. And I say it's only sort of a boss fight because it's more of a level. You're constantly heading up. You have infinite flight for this area, by the way, and he's just trying to dive bomb onto you and knock you down, doing damage and possibly causing you to have to redo certain parts of the stage. It's really easy, and honestly, you should just hold up and B to fly and just hold up the entire time because then you can progress through it pretty quickly. There's also some wind which pushes you upward, speeding up certain sections. There are spikes on certain parts of the ceiling, but as long as you keep an open eye out, you should be able to dodge them, no problem. It's basically there to either get you used to the flying controls a bit more, or to introduce you to Speedy's character in and of himself. Though I'm trying to remember if this guy was ever in the Sonic comics. I wouldn't be surprised if he was, but I can't quite recall. I know at some point they adapted Tails' Adventure on the Archie comics, but I'm not entirely sure. And that's it. That's the fight. Pretty easy. And for some stupid reason, he thinks we're worthy and gives us a Chaos Emerald, the purple one. Why would you do that? I am your enemy. You're trying to get those Chaos Emeralds. Why are you doing this? You idiots. Either way, he flew off to that little cave thing. We actually have a way to get to it because the remote bot can turn into a submarine. Weird. But with that, I'm going to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching. Here's the password screen, by the way. It's pretty long. And in part 2, we'll be heading on to that island and seeing what we can do over there. See you guys then.